19-year-old girl was married off to Cowboy as a cruel joke, but her first words made his blood run cold. Winter had settled hard over Gritstone Gulch, turning the outskirts of town into a wasteland of wind and frost. At the edge of it stood a leaning cabin, its roof patched with scrap tin, its chimney coughing out the last of the firewood. Inside, Clara Mayhew moved like a ghost. Quiet, efficient, unnoticed. She was 19, with hands calloused from chopping wood and fingers stained with soot. Her mother had died when she was a girl, and since then the only family she had left was Bartholomew Croft, her uncle in name, but never in kindness. A drunkard with a mean streak, Barth spent his days at the bottom of a bottle and his nights cursing the cold and Clara alike. She kept the place running, cooked, cleaned, mended, hauled water from the half-frozen creek while he slept through mornings. But nothing she did earned thanks, only more shouting when the stew was thin or the fire burned too low. That morning, as the wind howled against the walls, Clara was mending a tear in her only winter shawl when a knock came at the door. She heard Barth grumble, then shuffled to open it. A moment later, a deep voice answered. "I came to speak about the loan, Mr. Croft." I figured we could settle things civilly. Clara's fingers froze mid-stitch. The man at the door was Gideon Blackwood. Once not long ago, he'd owned the largest ranch outside Gritstone Gulch. He had cattle, hands, and a wife who laughed like springtime. Then came the sickness, the blizzards, the ruined harvests. His wife died. His fortune followed. Now he was a widowed farmer with 2 children and a house barely standing, but honor still held him upright. He stood now with snow on his shoulders, hat in hand, looking nothing like the man Barth once borrowed from. "I'm not here to take your house," Gideon said calmly. "But I'll ask for something fair. Timber, labor, or a strip of land if that's all you've got." Barth scoffed, bottle already in hand. "Land? I got nothing but trouble and a mouth to feed that ain't mine." With a cruel laugh, he yanked Clara forward from the corner of the room where she had been pretending not to exist. "Here," he slurred, a wicked glint in his eye. "Take her. 19. Still pure. Never kissed a man. Make her your wife and we'll call it square. A fine joke on the both of you." Gideon blinked, stunned. "What the hell are you saying? She's mine to give. She eats my food, lives in my house. You want something of value? Take her." Clara didn't speak. Her breath caught in her chest like a trap snapping shut. Gideon stepped back. "I'm not here for this," he said firmly. "I don't take people. I came to speak man to man." But then he looked at her. Really looked. Her hands were raw with cold, skin split and bleeding. A bruise yellowed beneath her sleeve. Her eyes held no fight, only a hollow stillness, as if whatever dreams she'd had were long buried under survival. It was then that her first words to him made his blood run cold. She met his gaze, and her voice, though barely a whisper, was as steady and sharp as ice. "If this is the price for walking out that door," she said, "I will pay it." A silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of her resolve. It wasn't a plea, it was a transaction. The sheer, chilling depth of her despair, that being sold as property was preferable to staying, hit Gideon like a physical blow. Then he nodded once. "I will take her," he said quietly. "But I won't touch her. Not unless she asks." Barth laughed. "Suit yourself, cowboy." He didn't know or care that he'd just given away the only person who ever lit a fire in his empty life. Gideon helped Clara onto his horse. She sat behind him, hands trembling, not from cold, but from the weight of something shifting. As they rode away, the wind swept through the valley. Neither of them spoke. But for the first time in years, Clara didn't feel like she was walking into another cage. She was riding toward something else. She just didn't know what. She didn't know what hurt more, being bartered like a mule, or feeling grateful to the man who took her as if she was something worth saving. The Blackwood farm sat on the edge of the valley where the trees gave way to wind and silence. It was a house built by hands that had known loss, small, lean, with shingles that rattled when the gusts came down from the mountains. Snow piled on the windowsills like sleep that never melted. Clara stepped off the wagon and into her new life with stiff fingers and quiet steps. Inside, the house smelled of smoke and earth. There were 3 wooden chairs around a rough-hewn table. A tin kettle on the stove hissed half full. The roof leaked into a tin bucket. The bed in the corner was barely wide enough for one, and the fire in the hearth crackled as if holding on out of pity. 2 small faces peeked from behind a hanging quilt. "That's Owen," Gideon said, pointing to the older boy. "And Maeve, she is for." Owen's eyes were sharp, suspicious. Maeve clung to the fabric and blinked like a fawn in tall grass. Clara nodded, heart thudding. "Hello," no answer. That night, Gideon made them supper, if it could be called that. Watery porridge, no salt. Clara offered to help, but burned her hand on the kettle and dropped a spoon. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Later, alone in her corner room, she sat on the edge of the straw-stuffed mattress, unrolling her sleeves to see her palms, cracked from washing, fingertips raw. A knock on the door startled her. It was Gideon. He did not look her in the eye. He held out a small jar, half-used with a waxy green salve inside. "Pine sap." "It helps, thank you," she whispered. He left without another word. In the mornings, Clara rose before dawn. She tried to wash vegetables in the water bucket, only to find the top layer frozen. Her hands bled from scrubbing. The broom splintered. She oversalted the stew. Maeve cried at the table, wanting her mother. Owen crossed his arms, eyes full of silent judgment. One afternoon, Gideon handed her a hatchet. "I will show you how to split kindling. You will not last long here without knowing." Clara looked at her blistered palms. "I suppose soft hands do not belong out here. They belong," he said, "but they do not last." So she learned, slowly, stubbornly. They boiled wild mint for tea. Gideon showed her how to use 2 fingers and a thumb to start a fire faster. He taught her the rhythm of the axe, the trick to catching falling snow in a tin cup for cleaner water. She tried to joke one evening after Maeve had fallen asleep with her thumb in her mouth. "I thought I was marrying a man. Turns out I got 2 grumpy children with it." Gideon smirked. "You got the better end of the deal. Children don't argue as much." Owen, from the corner, muttered, "I heard that." Then came the night she burned the molasses cake. It had started as a simple supper. Clara wanted to surprise them. She found cornmeal, lard, and a jar of molasses in the cupboard. She stirred, poured, baked, but the fire was too hot. The cake blackened within minutes. When she opened the oven door, smoke gushed out like a beast. It filled the cabin, making Gideon drop his cup, and Maeve burst into tears. "Open the window!" Gideon shouted, coughing. Clara flung it open, gasping, fanning the air with her apron. Owen ran for the door and flung it wide. "We're going to die from poison cake," he yelled. That did it. Clara dropped to her knees and laughed. Loud, sharp, free. The kind of laugh that caught in her chest and shook loose something heavy. Tears came with it, hot and sudden. It was the first time she had laughed since her mother died. Gideon watched her, a hint of warmth behind his tired eyes. "Next time," he said, helping her to her feet, "just warn us before you try to kill us with dinner." Clara sniffed, still grinning. "Deal." The days grew colder, but the house began to warm in quiet ways. Clara discovered the recipe by accident. She was searching through the back cupboard for flour when she found a folded scrap of parchment behind a rusted tin. The handwriting was delicate, almost hesitant. A list of ingredients: flour, butter, dried berries, with a note in the margin, "Add a spoonful of honey if it has been a hard day." She held it gently as though it might crumble. It was a recipe for berry scones, the kind Maeve had once mentioned in her sleep. Clara made it the next day. She burned the first batch, but tried again. By sunset, the scent filled the house, warm, sweet, like memory. Maeve came into the kitchen barefoot and blinking. "Mama used to make that." Clara knelt beside her. "Would you like to help me next time?" Maeve nodded solemnly. That night, for the first time, she climbed into Clara's lap while the fire popped and crackled. At bedtime, she brought her little wooden comb and said, "Sit. I want to fix your hair." Clara sat on the bed's edge, apron still on, as Maeve gently parted her hair and began to braid. Her fingers were small but careful, like she remembered watching her mother do it. The braid was crooked and loose, but Clara wore it to bed. Gideon said nothing when he noticed. But that night, Clara found a new wooden peg installed beside her wash basin, just the right height for a towel. The next morning, a second one appeared lower, for Maeve. It wasn't ground, but it was something. Later that week, Clara stepped outside after cleaning the stovepipe and saw him, Gideon, sitting on the front step, back hunched, hands busy with yarn. He was mending a tiny slipper, Maeve's wool bootie. His fingers moved with care, slower than they once did. As he worked, he whispered to himself, "She's gone. She's gone. But the kids still need warm feet. Keep going. Keep moving." Clara froze. She watched him through the drifting snow. He looked older in that moment, smaller somehow. Not the man who had stood so solid in the saloon weeks ago, but someone trying not to fall apart. She didn't speak, just turned back inside. That night, after the children had gone to bed, she placed a tin mug of warm milk on the step beside him. Beside it, a torn scrap of paper. For words written in neat, slanted script, "You are not alone," he didn't reply. But when she woke the next morning, the mug was washed, dried, and sitting on her shelf. Little things kept changing. Owen began speaking to her, short phrases, mostly about chores, but no longer with that wall in his voice. He let her help feed the chickens. Once, when she spilled a pail of water, he rolled his eyes and handed her a rag without a word. Progress. Then, one quiet evening, she returned from collecting firewood to find something on her pillow, a smooth blue stone, the kind found only by the creek where the sun hit the water just right. She turned to see Owen pretending to read at the table. "Thank you," she said. He didn't look up. "It's just a rock," but she kept it. Every night, Gideon still kept to himself. He slept on a cot near the hearth. His door never opened past the crack needed to nod good night. He never touched her, never crossed the line they both had drawn. And yet somehow, each day folded them closer. In the way he poured her tea without asking, in the way she mended the fraying collar of his shirt without a word. They never spoke of affection. But they were building something, not with declarations, but with small acts and silence. It was the kind of love that crept in through cracks, like firelight through a cabin wall. The first real snowstorm of the season rolled down the valley like a pale curtain. It muted the world outside the cabin, turning fields and fences into one unbroken sheet of white. Inside, Clara stirred a pot of stew while the children played with scraps of yarn. Gideon had gone into town at dawn to trade eggs for salt and nails. By evening, the storm had thickened. Clara set the table, glancing at the door. When it finally opened, Gideon stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots, hat rimmed with frost. He was not alone. A man followed him in, tall, loud, with a red scarf and the easy swagger of someone who belonged in saloons. Finn Dolan, Gideon's oldest friend from the lumber camp, smelled of whiskey and wind. "Well, you did it, Gideon," Finn grinned. "Took yourself a young wife, did you? Smart man." "House looks better already." Gideon set the basket down, jaw tightening. "Finn, watch your mouth." Finn smirked. "Come on. We all know why a man takes a girl like that out here. Cold nights, empty bed, that is enough," Gideon snapped. Clara froze by the stove, ladle hovering. She wanted to disappear, but her feet felt nailed down. Finn chuckled. "No shame in it." "Hell, if I had the chance, I did not marry her for that," Gideon said sharply, voice low but heavy. "I took her because she had nowhere else to go. Out of pity, not love." Silence. Only the fire popped. Clara's heart stumbled. Out of pity, not love. The words rang like a bell. She set the ladle down, quiet and careful. She could not breathe, could not look at him. She excused herself in a whisper the men did not hear and went to her room. Her hand shook as she folded her few clothes into the burlap sack. She laid Maeve's little wool shoes on the pillow and smoothed them with her palm. By the time the stew was ready, Clara was gone. Maeve woke at midnight, coughing from the dry air, calling for Mama Clara in a hoarse voice. When she saw the bed empty, she wailed. Owen tried to soothe her, but her crying turned frantic, breaking into sobs. Gideon came in from the barn, wiping his hands. "What is it?" "She is gone," Owen said. "Her bag." "It's gone." Maeve can't stop crying. Gideon felt the blood drain from his face. He crossed the room in 2 strides and opened her door. Empty. The pine sap jar still on the shelf, the towel on the peg, and on the bed, the shoes. He picked them up slowly as if they were fragile. His throat ached. Maeve's sobs turned to hiccups. She reached for him. "Papa, find her, please." "I will," he said, voice cracking. "I will bring her back." He knelt, pulled on his boots, grabbed his coat, and shoved his hat on. Owen stood in the doorway wide-eyed. "Stay with your sister," Gideon said. "Do not let the fire die, but Pa, stay." He stepped into the storm. Snow swallowed his footprints in seconds. The wind bit through his coat. He mounted the mare bareback, too desperate for a saddle. Somewhere out there, Clara was walking into the white alone, carrying her hurt like a wound. Gideon's jaw clenched. He pressed his heels to the mare's flanks. The storm rose around him. Sky and earth blurred into one merciless grey. The snow came down like a punishment from heaven. Gideon's horse fought the wind with every step, nostrils flaring, hooves sinking into the white. Visibility had vanished. The world was a swirling blur of grey and silence. He rode with only instinct and memory to guide him, scanning the tree line, the hills, the old paths no one walked anymore. Then, just as he rounded the bend near the edge of Widow's Peak, he saw it. A sagging, weather-beaten cabin half buried in snow. An abandoned trapper's hut long since left to rot. Smoke did not rise from the chimney. The door hung crooked. He jumped from the horse before it fully stopped and yanked the door open. She was there, curled on the floor beneath a moth-eaten blanket, her back to the wall. Snow clung to her skirt, her boots soaked through. Her lips were blue. Her eyes barely opened. "Clara," he dropped to his knees, shaking snow from his shoulders, heart in his throat. She blinked slowly, confusion and recognition fighting behind her gaze. You came?" "Of course I came." He shrugged out of his coat, wrapped it around her shaking frame. "God help me, Clara. I did not mean it. You were never a pity." Her teeth chattered too hard to speak. Gideon pulled her closer to the fireless hearth and cradled her against him, pressing her frozen fingers between his palms. Her body trembled against his chest like a wounded bird. "I am sorry," he whispered, forehead to hers. "I do not know how to say things right." Never have. She did not answer, just clutched the coat tighter. He cleared his throat, voice thick. "I wake up every morning and think about whether you have eaten. I check the kettle to see if you made tea. I watch the light in your room and wonder if you slept at all." He swallowed. "I never think about myself anymore. Not since you came." Her breath hitched. "And I know I never touched you because I promised I would not. But I think about your hands when they braid Maeve's hair. I think about how you hum when you cook, even when it is just potatoes." She began to cry, quietly at first, then harder, her face pressed into his shoulder. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you so good to me?" He exhaled a long, ragged sound. "Because," he said, his voice low, trembling, "you're the first soul who ever looked at my ruins and decided to stay." She buried her face against him, sobbing in the quiet dark of the abandoned cabin, and Gideon held her as if by holding her he could keep the hurt from returning. Outside the storm raged on, but inside, for the first time, they let the silence speak. And in that silence, something broken began to mend. The snow began to melt in patches along the southern ridge, revealing the cracked earth beneath. It was not yet spring, not truly, but the wind had softened, and the sky no longer looked like stone. Days passed since Gideon had found Clara in that lonely cabin. She no longer slept with her coat clutched around her. She braided Maeve's hair again. Owen sat beside her at breakfast, pretending not to smile when she passed him the honey. Still, something lingered between her and Gideon, something fragile, waiting for the right moment to bloom. One morning, just after dawn, Gideon saddled the mare without saying why. Clara, still tying her apron, looked at him curiously. "Come with me," he said, "just for a little ride." She hesitated. "The stew?" "It'll wait." So she climbed up behind him, arms hesitantly around his waist, the smell of leather and pine in her nose. They rode in silence up through the thinning trees to a narrow clearing halfway up Sorrowful Ridge. The air there was cooler, thinner. The ground sloped gently toward a patch of flat soil ringed by stones. Clara's breath caught. Wild mountain thyme. Dozens of small, struggling stalks, still green despite the frost. Some bent sideways, some rising proud. The scent was faint, but it was there, fresh, earthy, unexpected in this wild place. Gideon dismounted and offered his hand. She took it and stepped into the clearing, boots crunching on frozen needles. "I planted them after she died," he said softly, gazing at the plants. "From the seed she left in a drawer. Said she always meant to start a garden." Clara knelt beside one of the plants, fingertips brushing the soft grey-green leaves. "You kept them alive all this time." "I try," he said. "Some years they make it, some they don't." She looked up at him. "You never told me about this." "Some things are easier to show." Gideon reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folded square of fabric. It was worn at the edges, faded from sun and time, but the embroidery was still clear, a single bluebird stitched with care. "This was the first gift my mother ever gave to my wife," he said. "She was not easy to please, my mother, but she liked that girl from the moment they met." He held it out to Clara. "She would have liked you, too." Clara blinked hard. I cannot take this." "It belonged to her." He shook his head. "No, it belonged to Hope." "I have not felt that in a long time." She took the handkerchief with trembling hands, cradling it like something sacred. "I am not trying to replace her," she whispered. Gideon looked at her then, fully, steady and warm. "I do not want her replaced. What I want is to feel alive again." He stepped closer, his voice low, careful. "You do not fill her space. You carved a new one. And I am grateful for both." The Clara felt tears rise, but they did not fall. Not this time. She reached for his hand, rough and calloused, warm in hers. "I used to be afraid of the night," she murmured. The silence, the cold, the dark. Gideon's brow furrowed gently. "And now?" She looked around at the time, the sky, the man before her. "Now I have a fire," she said softly. "Here. With you." And in the hush of that high mountain clearing, where flowers dared to grow despite the cold, something rooted itself between them, not a promise, not yet, but the first true leaf of love. It was a clear morning after a storm. The snow had mostly melted, and the earth beneath was soft and slick with thaw. Clara had just finished mending Maeve's mittens when she noticed Owen was missing. "Where's your brother?" she asked. Maeve shrugged. "He said he was going to find the perfect stick." "For what?" "To make a bow." "A real one, not the baby kind." Clara's stomach tightened. She stepped outside, scanning the woods beyond the barn. The sky was pale blue, the air still, too still. She called his name once, twice. No answer. Her boots sank into wet mud as she ran toward the grove behind the field. That was where Owen always went hunting for treasures, old nails, bones, good branches. Then she heard it. "Help!" A faint cry, muffled. Her heart stuttered. She sprinted toward the sound, nearly slipping in the slush. When she reached the old well behind the oak tree, her breath stopped. Owen's voice echoed up from the bottom. "Ma, I fell. I can't, my leg hurts, hold on." "I'm here," she shouted, heart pounding. She dropped to her knees and peered down into the well. It was shallow, maybe 15 feet, but the walls were jagged and damp. Owen was huddled at the bottom, his face streaked with dirt and tears, one ankle twisted at an odd angle. Gideon came running a moment later, eyes wide, his breath sharp. What happened? He's down there. He was trying to find wood for a bow, Clara gasped. We need a rope. Gideon was already moving, grabbing a coil of it from the side of the barn. He tied it to the nearest tree, tested the strength, and without another word, he slid down into the well. The descent was rough, scraping his palms and boots against the stone. Clara leaned over the edge, voice shaking. Are you down? I'm here, Gideon called from below. He's banged up, but alive. We're coming up. Get ready. She braced herself, wrapping the rope around her arms. As Gideon began tying it under Owen's arms, the boy whimpered, teeth chattering. Ready! Gideon shouted. Clara pulled. The rope burned her palms raw, the strain shooting up her shoulders. Inch by inch, Owen rose into view, dirt smudged across his cheeks, eyes wide with fear. You're okay, she whispered, tears streaking her face as she hauled him out and into her arms. You're okay, baby. But Gideon had not followed. She turned back toward the well. Gideon. There was a grunt from below. I slipped. My ankle's gone bad. I can't climb out. Then hold tight, she said, wiping her face. I'll pull you up, too. Clara, no, your arms. Don't argue with me, she snapped. She looped the rope again, this time lower, braced her feet, and began to pull. Her muscles screamed. The rope tore at the skin on her palms. Her shoulder jerked painfully with each tug, and something popped, a sickening sound. But she kept pulling, because he was hers now. All of them were. When Gideon finally emerged over the edge of the well, gasping, dragging his bruised leg behind him, Clara collapsed beside him, her breath ragged, arms shaking, one shoulder already swelling. Owen rushed into her arms, clutching her around the neck. Mama, he sobbed. Don't ever leave me again. Ever. She held him close, wincing from the pain, but tighter still. Gideon crawled toward them, his eyes dark with worry. He took Clara's bleeding hands gently, looked at the torn skin, the dislocated shoulder. You pulled me up with that, he whispered. She nodded, too tired to speak. He cradled her hand against his chest and pressed his forehead to hers. My boy is safe because of you, he said, voice thick. We're all still breathing because of you. Clara smiled weakly, tears sliding down her cheeks. You're not alone anymore, Gideon. He pulled both her and Owen into his arms, holding them like they were everything, because they were. Summer came late to Gritstone Gulch that year, but when it arrived, it draped the valley in color. The thyme patch on Sorrowful Ridge, once pale and struggling, now bloomed wild and thick, humming with bees and sunlight. That was where Clara chose to marry Gideon Blackwood. There was no church, no preacher in robes, no piano, only the scent of earth and bloom, and the love that had survived frost, silence, and flame. The guests were few, Owen, in his only button-up shirt, standing proud, Maeve, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers, hair braided by Clara's hands, and Mr. Lyle, the blacksmith who had known Gideon since boyhood and could bless a union. Clara wore a simple cream dress stitched by her own needle. Her hair was pulled back with a ribbon Maeve insisted on tying. Gideon had no ring, but when asked what he had to offer, he reached into his coat and pulled out a sprig of dried thyme bound with red thread. This, he said, looking into Clara's eyes, is from the first plant that survived. He tied the stem gently around her wrist. It is not gold, he said softly, but it is everything I have and everything I mean. Clara's lips trembled. Then it is more than enough. They said their vows with